Those so-called extraordinary measures the Treasury Department can take would likely last us through the summer months. House Republicans this week plan to vote on their Full Faith and Credit Act, which allows for some spending outside of the debt limit, but only to pay principal and interest on current debt. In addition, payments for Social Security would remain in full and on time. Don't expect the bill to gain any traction in the Senate. Democrats argue it doesn't protect payments to soldiers, hospitals, doctors, and businesses. Our next guest argues the solution to all of this is not going to come from either party, and maybe that's a good thing. Kevin Williamson is writer for the National Review. He's the author of the new book, The End is Near, and It's Going to Be Awesome. Kevin, welcome. You say in this book, government in the U.S. is falling apart and not a moment too soon. The failures of the welfare state, health care, retirement pensions, all the government's fault, and that's a good thing. This is music to my ears, but explain why.
Well, yeah, if you look at these ridiculous debates we're having over the debt ceiling and the sequester and all the rest of it, we're talking about a very tiny amount of money in the context of the real fiscal overhang of government in this country, which is about $140 trillion once you include the unfunded liabilities and the entitlements. There's just no way those are ever going to be paid out at their current value. That is equal to about the value of all the financial assets in the world at the moment. So it's just not going to happen. It's twice the GDP of the human race. The good thing about this is that these programs that we're working so hard to defend, like Medicaid and Social Security, don't actually do a tremendous amount of good for people. Medicaid doesn't really provide much in the way of real health care benefits. And there are certainly much better ways for people to fund their retirements than something like Social Security. So the sooner those go broke, the sooner those disappear, and we replace them with better, more productive alternatives, then the better off the country is.
Kevin, appreciate you being here to share your views. We probably disagree on a lot. I wanted to focus in, though, on some of the premises of your book rather than just our ideological differences. It seems one of your themes is this idea that there is a problem with what you call government-related monopolies, right?
Yes.
That the government is taking on roles that if it would just back off, things would be better. And I was honestly a little confused about that, because if you look at, say, the healthcare market, the vast majority of healthcare service is provided through private markets, and that's true even with and especially after the Obamacare infusion of capital that goes to private insurance.
I hate to interrupt, but that's actually not true. Even before Obamacare was passed,
instead of
half of all health care spending.
I'll tell you what, Kevin, instead of interrupting, I'll give you the thought, and then I'm welcoming your rebuttal. But, yeah, one statistic would be 69% of Americans are not on government-funded health care. That's from the Journal of American Medicine. As for Medicare and Social Security that you mentioned, Medicare operates roughly with a 3% overhead. Private insurance has been up to 26% overhead. And just on schools, and then I'll bring you back in here on schools, you know, we used to have about 200,000 public schools in this country. We now have about 98,000, while private schools have risen. The majority of Americans still are in public schools, partly because if you're making $30,000 a year, you can't afford even the cheapest private schools. So my question being, what are the monopolies you're talking about, or where would you differ with that characterization?
Oh, well, certainly the schools are a good example of that sort of monopoly. And like most monopolies of that sort, the upper class really has an out. It's the middle class and the poor who get stuck with it, particularly in urban and rural schools that don't do very well. But, you know, we're talking about the monopoly of government services, and there's a really good example of that in the news today. We just had a story about a guy in the Air Force who's entrusted with policing sexual assaults, himself being accused of that very crime. And now law enforcement and that sort of thing is a sort of natural state function. But even in that situation, do you really want to give those institutions an absolute monopoly on this sort of thing? Or would you rather have multiple channels of justice, multiple channels of redress? In almost every situation, you're going to want more than one. So I'm not calling for an abolition of the public schools tomorrow, although I'd kind of like for that to happen. But what I'd like to see is for people to have more choices, to have more options for looking for innovative solutions to social problems, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in retirements, or whether it's in education. You know, the current model of education we have is essentially this one-size-fits-all 19th century Prussian factory model. We've got 900 kinds of shampoo on the shelves in one kind of school. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense.
Well, and Kevin, I wanted to dig in with you on health care as well, because one of the arguments you make is that basically no government service or good will be superior or cheaper than the private sector version of that. Well, we have the most privatized healthcare system of the developed world. We also have the highest cost. And drawing on some of what Ari was saying, if you compare Medicare cost increases to the cost increases you see among private health insurers, actually Medicare costs have risen less slowly. They also have risen, but less slowly. So in healthcare, it doesn't seem to me like the private sector is doing a better job than what our government is doing, albeit that what our government is doing is not perfect.
Well, there's no question that the healthcare market was defective long before Obamacare was passed. One of the worst mistakes Republicans and conservatives made in that debate was just keep on repeating, well, we've got the best healthcare system in the world. Well, if people really thought that, there wouldn't have been that much call for reform. Now, in terms of ours being the most private system, that's actually not true. If you look at places like Switzerland, you actually will see a much stronger, more robust private market in insurance there. I mean, they've got a mandate the way we now do, but it's actually a really very well-functioning private market, which we haven't had. So, yeah, to take the ex-ante state of American healthcare as the case for free markets would be a mistake because it wasn't a very good system. As I was pointing out before, even under the pre-Obamacare regime, about half of all healthcare spending in the United States happened through government. So it's not, I think, a particularly good example of the sort of thing I'm talking about.
And the government side of it, though, was doing better than the private insurance market, at least in terms of controlling costs.
I'm not sure if that's true. They have a lot of ways to push costs off onto other budgets. So, for instance, a lot of administrative costs associated with Medicare, they don't have to put on the Medicare budget because Medicare doesn't have to, say, collect premiums because the tax collecting authorities do that for them. So you've got, some budgetary legerdemain, I think, going on there. But I think particularly if you look at the case of Medicaid, you'll come up with a system that is spending a great deal of money and empirically getting almost no results for it.
Kevin, you say that in the last chapter that we should have the right to exit the political system, just as you say we should have the right to, we do have the right to exit our cell phone contract. And those things are obviously entirely different. And if you choose to not work with Verizon, then you may not get cell phone service at all. You encourage people in the last paragraph to not pay their taxes. If 10% of us did not pay our taxes, there wouldn't be enough people to lock us up. I don't think that that's true, but even if you don't pay your taxes, you will still be accruing the benefits of the government and others paying taxes, parks, military, police, fire, on and on and on. So it's not really a revolutionary or even cute gesture to suggest right to exit, don't pay your taxes when you're still getting the benefits of others paying their taxes.
Sure, and that's not a facetious suggestion on my point. Yeah, you're accruing benefits, but also benefits you haven't necessarily asked for. I mean, given a choice, I would exit Social Security entirely and forego my retirement benefits. The situation being what it is, since I'm going to get robbed my whole life for it, I'll collect the check when the time comes. What I had particularly in mind during that particular paragraph was Gandhi's confrontation with the British government, where they said, do you expect us just to walk away? And he says, yes, in fact, that's what I expect. In the end, that's what you'll do, because 100,000 Englishmen can't control 350 million Indians unless they cooperate.
Kevin Williamson, very interesting stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Do you know this guy? If not, you should.